Here's the story of the difficult task of fixing my PC. I kept getting blue screens and I decided that it must be because the motherboard was broken. HP didn't agree with me, but I went ahead and bought a new one anyway. So, now for the install. Opened up the case, took out the hard drive, took out the mount, took out the RAM, took out the front case fan, unclipped the GPU, took out the GPU, took out the Wi-Fi card, annoyingly it was threaded through the case, took out the CPU and cooler, took out the motherboard, and opened up the new one. Turns out the case is proprietary, so even though they're the same form factor, the mounts do not line up. But we managed to get 2 screws lined up and got the motherboard in. Then we realized the power supply didn't have a 24-pin motherboard connector, just this proprietary 7-pin one. But no worries, we found a new power supply that did have 24 pins. But once again, turns out the case is proprietary and it doesn't fit other power supplies. Good thing we had a backup PC. This one was going to be risky because it was my only leftover PC. Took out the power supply, drives, and GPU. Then just took out the entire motherboard and everything on it. So now to fix one PC, we have 3 motherboards. The backup motherboard, the broken HP motherboard, and the upgrade motherboard. We installed the new B550M Aorus P motherboard, but realized the rear I/O slot doesn't line up. No problem, I have the Dremel. Now the rear I/O slot lines up perfectly. We install a Ryzen 5 3500 MHz CPU, put on some heat paste, and put on the stock AMD cooler. During this time we also installed 16 GB of 3600 MHz RAM, along with a 1TB M.2 drive. Next comes the wiring. And yes, it had a 24-pin connector, and all the others we needed. Except, it only had a 4-pin CPU connector instead of an 8-pin. So, we even tried our backup power supply that was in the other room. But that one only had a 6-pin, not an 8-pin. But thanks to our good friend Jeff Bezos, we soon had a 550-watt modular power supply. At first it didn't fit in the case, but then I took a hammer and a flathead screwdriver and it finally gave in. We also plugged in a 2TB hard drive for extra video storage. I realized there was no place for a fan, so I jerry-rigged one to the outside case. Finally we closed it up, plugged it all in, and got ready to game. But all we were met with was a blue screen. So I opened the UEFI and reconfigured the boot drives to the M.2. And voila, there's a working PC. And an unmounted power button since the old case didn't have a modern plug. So after 3 weeks of it being broken and way too many surprises with the build, I finally have a working PC.